Welcome back, everybody, to Unit 1, Day 2, as we begin looking at supply and demand, and more specifically at the demand curve itself. And so we're going to want to, by the end of this, be able to explain the difference between shifts into the demand curve and what we call movements along the demand curve. We'll look at the determinants of demand, what causes shifts, and we'll try and be able to predict what happens to the demand curve given certain situations. And we'll also discuss in a moment uh, what is a market, and we'll look at a basic diagram known as the circular flow diagram, which will come up a couple of different times through the course of our study of economics. So what is a market? A market is made up of consumers and producers. A market exists for the purchase or sale of a good or a service. And so in this circular flow diagram, what we see is, or what it's assuming is that there are basically two groups: households on the left, firms on the right. And households, we say, are going to be the owners and possessors of what are known as the factors of production, the land, the labor, the capital that goes into making things. And the households own those, and they will give them to the firm. So the black line, they're giving the factors of production to the firm, but they don't give it to them out of the goodness of their own heart. They're going to get paid by the firm. The firm will pay them wages and rent um, to for the right to have access to the materials that go into making things. That's what we call the factor market, and we'll deal with that in the latter half of the course. Then it's circular because the firms then produce goods and services that they will give to the households. That black line, again, going from the firm to the home. And the households will give the firm, in exchange for those goods, money. So there's a flow of factors of production. So from the household to the firm, the factors go to the firm. The firm produces goods and turns those goods back over to the household, and then they keep exchanging. And the same way with money, it sort of flows circularly. The firm pays the household wages for the factors of production, and then the households turn that money around and hand it back to the firm in the form of consumer spending. And so this is sort of the basic flow of goods and services. Now, that goods and services market is the one that we're going to look at first, and we're going to find that goods and services market can take one of four different shapes or characteristics. We're going to talk about competitive markets, we'll talk about monopolies, we'll talk about oligopolies, and we'll discuss monopolistic competition. So markets are consumers and producers where there is an exchange of goods and services for payment. And the most basic one is what we call the competitive market, which is what we're going to look at um, right now in terms of both supply and demand. So when it comes to thinking about demand, think in terms of games. So one game that many young people have played when they're in elementary school is musical chairs. So if you're thinking in the context of musical chairs, imagine that you're playing this game. It's super competitive. The winner gets $100 in prize money if they win this game of musical chairs. And but we have some stipulations, and one of them is that you can actually buy your seat. You can guarantee that you will succeed in this game and move to the next round by simply paying for the right to do so. We're trying to figure out what the price ought to be. Well, we can create what's known as a demand schedule that tells us the combination of prices and quantities that people are willing to pay. So we could say if the price is $1, how many people in our game, let's say there's a room of 30 people, how many people would be willing to pay $1 to guarantee they get to move on to the next round for a shot at winning $100 at the end? That's pretty good, most people. Maybe not everybody. Some people don't like to play. They just, I don't really care. But at $1, it's probably worth it. At $3, how many people would be willing to pay to guarantee a seat in this round? Again, most people probably would. Some people might not. A few people will probably fall off. $5 price, starting to get a little pricier. Some people may not think it's worth $5. Maybe they like their chances. They go, you know what? I think I'm gonna survive this round. I'd rather not give up $5 for a chance to win 100 because I think I can do it without spending the money. So the higher the price, the fewer there are people that are interested in paying to guarantee they get a seat. So we can imagine at $10, there's even fewer people. At $90, a whole lot fewer people, unless there's somebody who's just really bad at musical chairs. So we would create this sort of combination of prices and quantities. And that set of combination is what we call the demand schedule. And that demand schedule can be graphed. And that graph has a vertical axis of price, or P, and a horizontal axis of quantity, or Q. And if you look at it, you might say to yourself, well, what do I notice about the quantity demanded? Which is what we call this. The price generates a quantity demanded. What do I notice about the quantity demanded as price increases? And if you're looking at it, you'll notice that the quantity demanded decreases when the price increases. So if the price is very low, let's say $1, there's a huge demand, quantity demanded. A lot of people are willing to pay for their seat at $1. But as the price rises to $100, fewer and fewer and fewer people are willing to pay. Similarly, with selling your seat, some people could just choose to sell the seat. If I offered you $1, would you give up your seat? Some people might take us up on that offer because they sit there and say, well, I mean, $1 guaranteed. I don't think I'm going to win the game, so 1 is better than 0 because I think I'm going to lose. So yeah, sure, I'll sell my seat for $1, but not very many people. I think a lot of people would like to stick into the game and see how this goes, and they think they have a chance to win. If the price rises to $3 or $5, there will be an increasing number of people who are willing to give up their seat because, again, sort of they're looking at the odds, and you pay me $5, I don't think I'm going to win. 5 is better than 0, so sure. $10, even more people are willing to give up their seat, to sell their seat to somebody else. Because a guaranteed payout of 10 is better than a hope at 100. And so we could plot this out too. This is our supply schedule. We could plot this out on a graph. And again, vertical is the price, horizontal is the quantity. What do you notice about the quantity supplied as price increases? Well, you'll see, if you're looking at this, that the quantity supplied is increasing. As the price rises, I'm willing to give more product available to consumers. So what's equilibrium? What would the price be? If we were playing this game and people were willing to buy and people were willing to sell and we were exchanging money, what would be the price? Well, it would be found at the intersection of supply and demand. And that intersection is what we call equilibrium. And that intersection sets the market price and quantity. And it's very, very important to our study of economics. Now, we want to look a little bit deeper at the demand curve itself. The demand curve, thinking back to our game, is determined by looking at the demand schedule, this combination of price and quantity. That demand schedule is all the possible combinations of price and quantity that exist. The actual price and quantity that the product will sell for, I don't know. I have to wait for supply to intersect with demand. But just looking at the demand curve itself, it's all of the conceivable prices and quantities that we could see occur in the market. And that curve is downward sloping, as we said. That downward slope is the basis of what we call the law of demand, that when the price rises, the quantity demanded decreases. Now, the law of demand is sort of played out in two different effects. There's what we call the substitution effect and the income effect. The reason the demand curve is downward sloping is because these two things are happening at the same time. The substitution effect is basically saying that if the price rises, it makes all other goods that are similar to this one relatively less expensive. But this particular good is relatively more expensive than its substitutes, than other products that are like it that I could choose to purchase instead of this particular good. And so because the price rising for good A makes it more expensive relative to good B, I'll want less of A and more of B. So when price rises, the quantity demanded decreases. There's also this income effect. As the price rises, our overall purchasing power is diminishing. I can't buy as many goods as before because the price rising has made me poorer in real terms. And so when the price rises, the quantity demanded decreases because I simply can't purchase as many as I could before. Both of these effects are causing the demand curve to have this downward slope. Now, there is a difference between what we call movements along the curve and shifts in demand. Shifts in, or the demand schedule, is based on this concept of ceteris paribus, all things being equal. I am willing to pay X for a Y number of goods based on my underlying assumptions about the preferability of this good, based on what I assume my income is going to be, based on what I assume the prices will be in the future. There's lots of things that are assumptions that are being made that determine how many goods I'm willing to purchase at a given price. So all things being equal, if the only thing that changes is the price, then I am just moving from one point along an existing demand curve to another point. It's what we call a movement along the curve. The curve itself remains the same. So a change in price leads to a change in quantity demanded, a movement along the demand schedule. Graphically, it looks like this. If there is an increase in price from a point of intersection, because price is determined by the intersection of supply and demand. So when there's an increase in the price, then we said that all things being equal, I would want fewer goods. So if we go from a point of intersection, we go up for the price and then to the left because I want fewer goods demanded at a higher price. It's creating a new intersection point. And that new intersection point is only achievable if the supply curve is shifting. You'll see that that new intersection point, that new equilibrium lies on the original demand curve. So what we say here then is that there is a movement along the demand curve caused by a shift in supply. That the increase in price is caused by a shift in supply leading to a change in the quantity demanded. Increases in price lead to movements along the curve. Now, shifts are an entirely different animal. With shifts, there's a change in the assumptions. How would your willingness to pay change if in the last, we were now facing the last round of the game? You can win $100. Are you willing to pay $5, $10, $20 to guarantee that you can win? The answer is yes. Your willingness to pay will rise. You'll be willing to pay more for a seat in the last round than you were willing to pay in the first round because you're getting closer to the guaranteed money. The stakes are higher. And so we see that when there's a change in the underlying assumptions about what I'm willing to pay, now we have what's known as a shift. So shifts in the demand curve are caused by a change in the willingness to pay for the good or service. When we want more of a good or less of a good at the original price, then we say there is a shift, and that is caused by a change in what are known as the determinants of demand. And we have a mnemonic that we'll look at in just a minute. But again, to look at this for a second graphically, what we're saying is I am willing to buy more goods at the original price. And as a result of that, wanting to buy more goods, that generally causes the price of goods to go up. That puts a new equilibrium point now along the existing supply curve. The only way to get to that new equilibrium point is to shift the demand curve, in this case, to the right. So there is no longer equilibrium at the original demand curve. There's a new equilibrium caused by a change in the demand curve, a shift, and that is a shift in demand caused by a change in one of the determinants. Now, if that's a little confusing, don't feel bad. Actual professionals sometimes get confused. So this is just a quote from the Wall Street Journal from 2022, in which a letter to the editor was written addressing an article that appeared in the newspaper talking about changes in demand, despite the fact that what the article was really talking about was a change in price. So if you're a little confused, don't worry about it. But I will say this, the difference between a change in demand and change in quantity demanded is an important concept that you will have to master for the AP exam. The mnemonic to help us understand the determinants of demand and when there is a shift is known as merit. So we're looking at market size, that is the number of consumers who want to buy the good, our expectations, related prices, income, and tastes and preferences. When it comes to shifts in demand, when there is a change in one of those 5 issues, one of those 5 determinants, we see a shift. If there's an increase, then we say we shift to the right. If there is a decrease, we shift to the left. When we're talking about market size, it's pretty simple. The more buyers there are in a market, the greater demand there is. That is, if I increase the number of people who want to purchase my good, we see an increase in demand. There'll be more people who want the product at the previous market price than before. For example, as the population gets older, there's an increase in the demand for healthcare related products and services. What we're seeing here is that the market demand curve is the sum of all the individual demand curves. So if the market is only Darla, then a price of $2 for coffee leads to 20 pounds in coffee beans. But if the market is Darla and Dino, then at $2, Darla wants 20, Dino wants 10, so the market demand curve is 30. So we see that as we add consumers, we see a right shift in the market demand curve. Expectations has to do with what we think the price will be in the future, or the availability of the product in the future, or my income in the future. So we could ask ourselves the question, what would happen to my demand for a product today if I thought that the price of gasoline is expected to fall tomorrow? If I'm driving down the street and I see I need to fill my gas tank, I could do it today, I could do it tomorrow, but I think it's going to be cheaper tomorrow, then odds are pretty good I will wait until tomorrow. So my demand for gasoline today is less. It shifts to the left. Same thing with income. If I'm sitting there and I say, what happens to my demand for a product today if I think my income is going to rise tomorrow? The answer is that I'll want the product today. I sort of act as if I've got that pay raise today, even though it's still coming into the future. The fact of the matter is, I think it will come, and therefore I take advantage of it now. The price of related goods also matters. Substitutes versus complements. Substitutes are goods where I either consume one or the other. So coffee and tea are substitutes. I either drink a hot cup of coffee or I drink a hot cup of tea, but most people don't drink a hot cup of both. So if the price of the good for coffee rises, coffee is more expensive than before. That means I'll consume less coffee, but I still want tea. I still want a hot drink. So my demand for tea increases. So a change in the price of one good does drive the demand curve for another. Complementary goods are ones in which I consume one and I consume the other with it. That when I consume one, I always consume the other. So peanut butter and jelly is a typical example. When people eat peanut butter, they typically add to it jelly to make a sandwich. So the price change in the price of one increase or affects the demand for the other. If peanut butter is more expensive, I'll be eating less peanut butter. Because I eat peanut butter and jelly together, then if I'm eating less peanut butter than before, that means I need less jelly as well. And so an increase in the price of one good leads to a decrease in demand if they're complementary in nature. Income also matters here. We have what are known as normal goods. If my income rises and I want more of the good, it's considered normal. If my income rises and my demand shrinks, then we call them inferior goods. And so an example here is the difference between buses and plane tickets. If you need to travel from one side of the country to the next, airline tickets are normal goods. If you make more money, you'll want to buy more airline tickets. Bus fare on a Greyhound is an inferior good. You're using the bus simply because you can't afford the nicer or more preferred good, a plane ticket. So if your income rises, you'll take fewer bus trips because you can now afford a plane ticket, which is far more enjoyable. And so your demand for planes will rise and your demand for buses will fall. So that's the interaction between a normal good and an inferior good. Tastes and preferences also make a difference here. If there's a new fad, that would drive demand to the right. If people are no longer interested in the product, it would shift demand to the left. So whatever the hottest craze is, you'll see an increase in demand for it. We'll talk more about equilibrium and supply in our next class.